It's Friday on Daily Delivery. I'm Michael Rand. Happy to be back with you for the final show of the week, and a good one coming up here. Nick Nelson from Twins Daily will join me here in just a few minutes to talk about that team this season and some of the angst that I sense around this team, and maybe some of the angst that I've projected in talking about this team this year. The dichotomy, the paradox, seemingly, of a first-place team, one that's still in first place, even after now losing 3 in a row at Detroit, losing the season series to Detroit for the first time in several years. Still 3.5 games up on Cleveland, still pretty mediocre in this really bad American League Central. And, kind of the frustration, the weird kind of place that fans are in. And, bigger than that, though, where the organization is at, what we maybe have overlooked that are positives, how we frame the things that are negative, and what the outlook is for this franchise, not just this year, but in years to come. Nick and I will get into all of those things and more here, like I said, in just a few minutes. Got a Lynx thought at the end. Bad loss for them on Thursday to the last place team in the WNBA, the Indiana Fever. First, though, what did I miss? I stayed up late, so maybe you didn't have to. Maybe you did, but I watched the vast majority of that Vikings-Seahawks game, and I've got some takeaways from it. I'll probably write about this today as well, but I got some takeaways from what I saw. I don't think there's any state secrets based on post-game comments, too, but I have 5 takeaways from this game, and I was watching this probably with a little bit more intrigue than most preseason games, just because the roster did turn over so much this year, right? I mean, they've got a lot of the same starters, but most of the starters don't play in the now abbreviated preseason anymore. I think Kevin O'Connell said they rested like 17 or 18 projected starters, didn't play any of those guys. So mostly it's the second string and the third string playing in this first preseason game out in Seattle. Vikings lose 24-13, but when they were playing mostly the second string with a little bit of first string mixed in, you had some first string offensive linemen, you had Jordan Addison in there for a spell, you had a few defensive players who might project to be starters or at least key contributors in there for a while. They were up 10-0, and so you take some of that away, you take a look at the bigger picture of a 24-13 loss, and here is what I come up with. Number one, Ty Chandler, running back, who got the majority of the workload when it mattered most, which is basically the first half of that first preseason game. I thought he looked really good. He projects, I think, to be the backup running back, even though when the unofficial first depth chart came out earlier in the week, he was listed at number 3. Alexander Madison, of course, didn't suit up for this game. He's the presumed he's the presumed starter this year, now that Dalvin Cook is not here. Kene Nwangu is the projected backup, at least according to that first depth chart, but Nwangu's still recovering from some injuries. Chandler got a chance to show what he can do, and I thought he was really impressive. Running the ball, in particular catching the ball. There's a sequence on the Vikings' first field goal drive in the first half where he caught a couple passes deep in Seahawks territory, turned them into, there was just modest gains, like 6 to 8 yard gains, but both of the plays, what I noticed on both those plays was he was anticipating cutting even before the ball got there, even before the defender got there, and that essentially turned a kind of a nothing play, a potential, not necessarily a negative play, but like a 1 or 2 yard gain into a positive 6, 7, 8 yard gain. He did that on 2 consecutive plays. That caught my eye. Someone who can catch the ball out of the backfield and make defenders miss. And he was doing that really all night long, not just catching the ball, but running the ball. And Kevin O'Connell, head coach of the Vikings, also noticed some of those same things. Here he is after the game.
Across the board, I thought in the first half, offensively, Nick Mullins really managing the game really well, making some big-time decisions, moving within the pocket, checking the ball down at the right times, pushing the ball down the field at the right times. I thought Ty Chandler jumped out. Just anytime he had the ball in his hand, very rarely tackled by the first defender. That was in space, catching the ball, and then picked up really where he left off as far as his ability when the lights come on to, sometimes turn into a different guy. And now I want to see it every single day and really see him be consistent, because he's proven, when it goes live and it's real football, he's a tough guy to bring to the ground.
Now you'll notice O'Connell also, gives Chandler something to work on. He wants to see, I think, those practice habits, bringing that to training camp, bringing that to practice every single day as well, and not just, turning it on when the lights come on. That's a good quality to have. Being able to be a good game performer is a good quality to have, but they already talked about him needing to be better in pass protection and him needing to be better now in his everyday habits. And I think those will go a long way to determining if he sticks in that primary backup role or if he gets usurped at some point here. Now, you also heard Kevin O'Connell talking about Nick Mullins, backup quarterback, and I agreed. I thought he was very good in this game. I think you see the obvious difference between Kirk Cousins and Nick Mullins when Nick Mullins is in there. But like Kevin O'Connell said, I thought Nick Mullins did a nice job of managing the game, of doing some good things in the face of some relatively heavy pressure, especially like on that first field goal drive. He was getting hit relentlessly, but stood in there, made some plays, got the Vikings down the field, and then later had a touchdown drive. He finished the game, I believe, 14 for 20, which is pretty good numbers. 14 of 20, 139 yards, no interceptions, one touchdown. He wasn't sacked, but he was certainly pressured and hit plenty. Passer rating of 106. So you see kind of the what they've got right now at backup quarterback. I thought he did a functional job as the number 2 quarterback. Kirk Cousins hasn't been injured, hasn't missed a start because of injury in 8 years as a starter in this league. So, Nick Mullins' job is generally pretty easy. Hold the clipboard, be in the meetings, but gave you a certain amount of confidence that if Kirk Cousins had to miss a game or two, if Kirk Cousins had to miss a series or two at some point, he can hold down the fort. So I thought that was important as point number 2. And, kind of bringing to point number 3, the overall sentiment I got from watching that game is that their next level depth looked pretty good to me. Whether it was skill position guys, whether it was guys on defense, kind of that next layer, which is probably the most important layer of depth, I would say. Once you got to kind of, once you're kind of past the 22 projected starters and you're talking about the next like 10 or 12 guys who might figure to play a lot, either as spot starters for injury or as, spot someone a series or two if they're banged up or tired. I thought that depth looked pretty good. I thought we'd already talked about Mullins, we had talked about Chandler. I thought some of the guys in the secondary did good work. I thought they got some pass rush, especially early on in the game, and it did some things to affect stuff there. So I thought they're kind of showing up in that kind of second string that built that 10-0 lead. I thought that depth looked good. Now, conversely, the next level after that next level, the third string or the second and third string mix, that did not look good. Those are the teachable moments, the correctable things that Kevin O'Connell likes to talk about. Those things will be worked on for sure, but that's a little bit concerning because some of those guys will be called upon at some point here. They did not look so good in this game. I'm thinking specifically about some of the pass protection, thinking about Jaron Hall, the rookie quarterback who has not done many favors, and then the defense gave up 3 second-half touchdowns owing to a combination of things. But they got to work on that next level of depth if they are going to be a team that can contend and a team that can withstand the natural injuries that happen over the course of a year. Number 4. Greg Joseph looked good in this game. Made both of his field goals, including a 54-yarder. Made his only extra point. If there was a kicking battle, he got all of the place kicking duties at least. And it was funny. I was kind of watching some of this game right before my kids went to bed, and my wife asked my daughter, "What do you even know exactly what the goal of football is?" None of my kids are sports fans, at least not watching sports fans. They like to play sports, but they are not watching sports on TV fans at all. My wife asked my daughter, "Do you know what the goal of football is?" And she's like, "Yeah, it's to get the football through those fork things," and the fork things being the uprights. And that is not the only goal in football, but you do see them kicking the ball through the uprights quite often. Sometimes not through the uprights, sometimes adjacent to the uprights. But Greg Joseph, good in this game, succeeded in the object, at least according to my 9-year-old daughter, of kicking the ball through those fork things. Final point in all of this. I spent a fair amount of time watching this game saying, who are these guys? And that's probably fairly common in the preseason. It felt like the overall theme to me as I watched it was I knew fewer and fewer of the second and third string players. And that just kind of underscores how much transformation the bottom part of the roster has undergone, and certainly even some of the top part of the roster, especially on defense. There's not a ton of continuity on defense as they've tried to kind of undergo this competitive rebuild, remake themselves under defensive coordinator Brian Flores, kind of remake themselves, get younger, get better after last year's defensive struggles, and really, honestly, the defensive struggles of the last 3 or 4 years. How are they going to be able to do that? Can they do that? Can some of these guys who we don't know their names right now, can they become key players for this team? Will that develop? And that's a big part about 2023. It's a big part about the Kwesi Adolfo-Mensah and Kevin O'Connell era. Can they successfully bridge that gap? Can these players become, hey, I know this player now. That's a player who I trust on the field right now. So that's going to be what I'm watching for a lot the rest of the preseason and certainly into the 2023 season as well.
MGM Wine and Spirits is the choice for savings, service, and a great selection of spirits, premixed cocktails, wines, and of course, ice-cold beers and hard seltzers. With over 30 locations throughout the Twin Cities and beyond, there's an MGM near you. Head to mgmwineandspirits.com to find a convenient location in your area. Get social. Follow MGM on Facebook and Instagram for all the latest news and trends. Make great moments with MGM Wine and Spirits, your locally owned and operated choice for over 50 years. Save time, save money. Shop MGM.
Let's bring in Nick Nelson right now, co-owner, co-founder of Twins Daily, first time on Daily Delivery, but I wanted to pick Nick's brain on a bunch of Twins subjects. Nick, how you doing?
Doing pretty good. Another tough game today, but can't complain. It's a sunny, nice day.
Well, and that's the funny thing, right? And maybe that kind of frames some of the early part of our discussion here is like, initially I reached out to you earlier this week. We couldn't make a time work on like Monday. If we were talking on Monday, we'd be talking about a team that had won 5 in a row. If it was Monday night, we'd be talking about a winning streak, a team that like looked like it can do no wrong. But instead, we are recording on a late Thursday afternoon. They've now lost 3 in a row to the Tigers, 2 straight shutout losses. Cleveland's won 2 in a row, so now the lead in the division's down to 3.5, although that's 4 games better than it was at the All-Star break. And you've been a fairly like vocal critic, at least of some things, especially not doing anything at the trade deadline. And I think we're seeing some of the evidence of maybe why that's a mistake with some bullpen issues they've had, and maybe the lack of right-handed hitting, even though they've had a little bit more of it at times lately. What to you, before we get to kind of like the general fan angst that I want to talk about, what to you was so upsetting about them essentially doing nothing at the trade deadline?
It just didn't make sense. I came in with pretty low expectations. I don't think I really expected them to make any huge moves or anything like that. I don't think many people did. But you look at this team, and it's obviously got some flaws. And beyond that, they're just constantly experiencing this attrition. We learned, I think, on the same day, or at least the same week of the deadline, that Brock Stewart had a setback. I don't expect him back this year. That Alex Kirilloff had a setback. He's on the injured list indefinitely. Just to get a few pieces that can maybe backfill some of what you're losing seems like a no-brainer. And the cost for some of these side complementary pieces was not going to be that high. So, you just kind of wonder if they leveraged themselves into a position where there was just nothing that could materialize at the end. I know they're in conversations, but absolutely baffling and flabbergasting to just make 0 moves when the time came.
You weren't impressed by flipping Jorge Lopez for Dylan Floro, 2 underperforming relievers. That was really, essentially, that was the only trade they made. And then, a few days later, and not too long ago, they got the waiver acquire for Jordan Luplow. I don't know if that does much for you either. He's been okay, but like those are like, it's like, tell me you tried in the least possible way, kind of feels like.
Yeah, those are pretty low wattage moves. The Floro thing is essentially just an admission of defeat on their attempts to go big last year. And you wonder if maybe what happened last year, if they're feeling spurned and that maybe caused them to have some hesitance. I hope not, because, it's risk is part of the game. I liked the way they operated at the deadline last year. They were aggressive. They went after high-end pieces. They didn't give up any truly, unmovable prospects. And it didn't work out. And sometimes it doesn't, but you can't not take the risks just because they exist,
No, I agree with that. I liked what they did last year. You're right. The Tyler Mahle trade didn't work out. The Jorge Lopez trade didn't work out. Fulmer was okay, and that was probably the least of the the least of the high leverage of the moves. But you're right. I don't know. Maybe some of it too is like they didn't have as much to deal this year because of what they dealt last year. But the kind of moves you're talking about, the kind of moves we were all talking about, getting a seventh or eighth inning reliever, getting a competent right-handed bat. We're not talking about trading 3 or 4 of your best prospects in that case.
Right. And, I think some of the rationalization was this constant, we like the guys we have. We didn't want to have to displace guys from the roster that are already there. I mean, we're talking about Joey Gallo. We're talking about Jordan Balazovic is like their fourth highest leverage reliever now. I mean, to say that there's not easy additions to make and, supplement this roster, at least on the margins, is just absurd. Now,
the trade deadline was its own kind of separate entity, but I think there was some angst around that in general. But you guys have touched on this. My colleague Patrick Royce has written about this. We've certainly talked about this. Like, there's just been kind of this feeling about this team that kind of runs counterintuitive or contradictory to their place in the standings this year. They've been a first place team for probably 90 or 95% of the year. They got off to a pretty good start. They have some likable pieces on this team. They have some things that, can endear them to fans, good starting pitching, some young talent. They just seem to be driving people crazy. Why is that? What's the disconnect between what they've, accomplished, at least relative to the AL Central, and the perception of this team right now?
Yeah, I mean, the place I try to be, I guess, as a Twins writer, is I try to blend that sort of, emotional fan investment of someone who's followed the team for my whole life with that objective sort of analytical reality and balance the two. So I see both sides of it. Like, there are those good things that you're talking about. They're probably going to make the playoffs. They have a roster makeup that, in my mind, is pretty well modeled to succeed in the playoffs. There's a lot of overreaction to these momentary lapses and these struggles, but at the same time, Minnesota sports fans and Twins fans especially have just been conditioned to this, and it's just like they're reinforcing the narrative every time they manage to find a semblance of momentum and get going. It's an immediate backslide, and they look like the worst team I've ever seen. I mean, they go to Kansas City and they get swept by the Royals. They drop 3 out of 4 to Detroit. They get shut out twice. I don't even know what they shut out them out today. Who that guy was? So it's just like it gets frustrating, the pessimism and sort of this doomsdayism. But even just as recently as last year, people are just like, they saw us in first place most of last year, and it was like, it felt inevitable the bottom was going to fall out, and it did. And it's like really hard to get people out of that state of mind, I think, when it's happened so many times.
Well, and how much of it, too, is like you look at it and you're like, at any point, even if they're in first place in the AL Central, they're usually like somewhere between the 8th and 10th best record in the American League. Like, how much do people just look at it and say, yeah, you're leading the division? But look at the division. Like, is that? I feel like that's a part of it. Like, people can't just be easily duped by first place Twins. Let's be happy about it.
Well, that's the other part of it. I mean, the 18-game postseason losing streak looms over everything. So there is very much, okay, yeah, they'll probably make the playoffs, but show us something there. I mean, and so it's so critical to just do something positive, make the playoff. First of all, not blow this massive opportunity,
right,
and then do something positive there and shake free of this narrative to some extent, which just brings us back to, like, why not get 1 or 2 more high leverage relievers at the deadline? I mean, they're so thin right now.
Yeah, they are. And I think the weird thing to me, and as I've talked to, I think, Phil Miller about this, and maybe Royce too on this show, is that, as mediocre as this year's team is, as much as they've kind of stumbled, kind of, backslid, and then, kind of go on a little run and get themselves a little bit of a cushion, as much as they might be frustrating, I mean, they're still like an 80 or 90% chance, I think, to probably win this division. And if they win the division, we're talking about a much different playoff format now than we ever were talking about in the in the 2000s and most of the and all the 2010s too, when they were in the years that they made it, where if they would happen to be one of the top 2 division winners, it probably is not going to happen this year. But as the 3rd division winner, which is the likeliest outcome, I would think, of anything that's going to happen this year, you get a best of 3 in your home ballpark against the worst wild card. Like, kind of almost paradoxically, this year's team might have the best chance, maybe outside of 2020 when they got to play the Astros, which they should have probably done, or maybe 2006 when you've got Johan Santana, you're playing the A's. But like all of those kind of what if years aside, like, strangely enough, like, this year could be their best opportunity to win a playoff series, or at least win a playoff game, even if you don't love this team.
Yeah, I mean, they have the ingredients. This is something I wrote about earlier this week on Twins Daily. the Twins offense is very frustrating in that they are so power reliant that sometimes it's just a day like today where they're not hitting home runs and they're not doing a single dang thing, but there's a lot of evidence to show that teams that are like that are more reliant on home runs to score, are more successful in the playoffs.
Right.
Because you're not playing a lot of pitchers that you can just string singles together against. You're probably not going to hit 5 straight singles against Max Scherzer. So the ability to do some damage when you're able to put the ball in play, hit a 2-run homer becomes a lot more valuable. We've talked about the starting pitching. Pablo Lopez and Sonny Gray, by wins above replacement, are 2 of the 10 best pitchers in Major League Baseball. And you've got Griffin Jackson and Yohan Duran at the back end of the bullpen who, when they're in their game, they can make this a 7-inning game, essentially. I mean, that is the recipe for winning in the playoffs, right?
Yeah, it is, and it's weird to think about it that way, but they do have those ingredients. You started with Gray and Lopez, and I think any postseason rotation starts with those 2 guys. But the rotation this year has been so deep. Like, you've got a lot of different people you can look at. Like, Kenta Maeda was good again today. He might have been, he's been one of their best pitchers since coming back from injury in late June. Bailey Ober's struggled a little bit lately, but he had been one of their best pitchers in addition to the other guys. Joe Ryan, hopefully, if he tells people about his injuries, will be okay when he comes back from whatever this groin ailment is that basically lingered for 7 starts, and he apparently didn't tell anybody. I don't know how much of that I believe and how much is a retroactive narrative, but we'll go with it and say he's going to be better. Like, they've definitely got some rotation options. Here's a question for you that I've posed to other people. Who would be your number 3 starter in a playoff series right now? Like, which could be in a wild card series, could be your kind of elimination, do or die, go home or advance game.
Yeah, I mean, I think you'd probably have to be looking at like Ober to start and go through the lineup once or twice and then hand it over to Maeda. Maeda has experience pitching in the bullpen in the playoffs. I think he'd probably be less resistant to it. It's not going to affect his contract in the same way as constantly, going back and forth between the bullpen and starting did in LA. So that's kind of the most obvious answer to me, but a lot can change in 7 weeks, right? So maybe Joe Ryan is back on his game back then. I think most people, if you asked in May, he maybe would have been their game 1 starter. So to lose Tyler Mahle, to have Joe Ryan on the IL like this and to still really be feeling so deep with rotation options for the postseason is an amazing thing. It's something that Twins fans should probably spend a little more time feeling good about.
And that's the thing. Like, I don't think we've celebrated the pitching enough because a lot of the narrative this year has been they can't hit, and that's been frustrating. And I want to get to that now because this lineup, at least in terms of, value, in terms of payroll, is kind of upside down right now. All of the guys who are getting paid, the big money, especially Carlos Correa, although he's done a little bit more lately. Jury's still out on that, but he's got at least a track record that suggests he's still got something in him for these last 2 months. But guys like Correa, Buxton, Joey Gallo, Christian Vasquez hasn't hit much. Like, all of the guys who are making, $8, $10, $33 million have not really hit this year. And it's the guys who are on the lower side of the payroll, the younger hitters, Julian, Kirilloff for a while, now Wallner, Jeffers, the guys who are not making all that much are the ones who are kind of carrying the offense to a large degree. You could frame that one of 2 ways. You can say, hey, they've got some unexpected success. This bodes well for them, if and when everybody else joins the party. Or you can say, man, they got $90 million basically tied up in a bunch of guys who are underproducing. How do you choose to look at it?
I look at it in a relatively optimistic light in that, if Julian or Jeffers, if those guys were struggling, I don't think I'd have a lot of hope for them necessarily to get better or be factors in September, the postseason. Guys like Correa and Vasquez and, to a lesser extent, Buxton, these guys have October experience. They're long tenured players with great track records who've been around. They got these contracts for a reason, right? So it's in there. You hope that maybe as they get healthier or they're able to work through these things or the pressure really starts to build and, they get into the situation that this is what the Twins paid Vasquez and Correa is for September and October, this veteran leadership. So maybe that'll come to fruition. And then if some of these younger guys are still hitting, you potentially have a recipe for a team that can do some things. So that's kind of, I guess, how I try to look at it.
I think that's fair. I think that's been part of the frustration too. Like, people, I think there's 2 reasons people, Minnesota fans, not just Twins fans, but Minnesota fans in general, get grumpy about teams. One is if they think the effort isn't there. And I don't think that's a problem with this team. I don't think you're seeing a lack of effort. Two, though, is when the high-priced players aren't playing up to their contracts. And so I think that's probably a part of what you're seeing. And it's not the pitching end. Like, I think Lopez and Gray, their two expensive pitchers, have been just fine this year and beyond just fine. And I think Lopez is continuing to ascend, and then Gray, giving them plenty still this year, just never gets any runs. So if you think about that, I think there is some room for that, come October. As you think about the big picture of this, a couple things for you, Nick Nelson, from TwinsDaily.com, co-founder, co-owner of Twins Daily. What happens if, and this is, still a possibility, what happens if they don't win this division? A very winnable division last year. It's not been a great division for a while now, but especially this year. Like, what if the wheels come off, they finish 76 and 86 and just like give away this terrible division to Cleveland or even Detroit, who knows? Like, what if somebody wins this with a 500 record and the Twins are sitting there? I mean, we got to be talking about a regime change at a certain point, don't we?
Yeah, it's tricky. I think there's got to be some kind of significant change at that point, because that is a catastrophe of unthinkable proportions. It would be to blow this thing when Cleveland sold and gave up. But at the same time, I try to think of like, who's to blame? Who really screwed this up? If it comes down to it at the end of the year, like the way this is shaping up is that the Twins had a good enough team and Carlos Correa was just not good enough as the centerpiece. Are you going to say they screwed up and made a bad decision by taking that opportunity to sign Carlos Correa? I think that was a no-brainer. I think I would still do that. I mean, the Twins are never going to make a deal like that again. So they did build the pitching staff that was promised. I mean, in some ways they have been successful, but I think what's really frustrating from a outside standpoint is that there just seems to be maybe like a complacency or like apathy about what's going on. Like, we're not going to shake up the coaching staff or fire the hitting coach. Not that that's really helped the Yankees. We're not going to dump Joey Gallo. We're not going to. They stuck with Max Kepler, which turned out to be a good idea, but right. We're not going to make a move at the deadline. To stick to that kind of script, we're not going to change anything, and to have it go that direction, you got to make some kind of big shakeup. I don't think that means clearing house necessarily, but something's got to change in that case.
So what's your baseline then for the rest of the year? Like, what makes you say at the end of this season this was a successful year?
They gotta at least win a playoff game. You gotta win at least one playoff game. The playoffs are volatile, so it's hard to really put all your hopes and dreams on what happens in a 3-game series, but you can't miss the playoffs, and you can't extend this streak to 21 games. You just can't. That is an unsuccessful season.
Yeah. It'll be 20 games, but yes.
Oh yeah, that's right. Nah.
Only 20. Just extending the all-time modern North American professional sports record.
Yes. Only 20.
I think that's fair. Do you have what's your biggest, as you've thought about your Twins fandom, and you go back to a lot of these losses, what's the one that sticks to you as the one that was like, man, that's disappointing. That should have been better.
In this particular season?
Not this particular season. I'm talking about the playoff failures, the 18 in a row and kind of the losing all the series.
Gosh, I go all the way back to 2004 as the turning point. I mean, the last game of series where they won a game, they won game 1 with Johan. They had game 2 in their hands. Yeah. Anyone who remembers those days with Joe Nathan getting run into the ground and some weird managerial decisions, that's the one that always sticks the most in my mind. And honestly, I think that game was what inspired me to start blogging. I started my blog the next spring.
Is that right? So sending Joe Nathan out for the 3rd inning in Yankee Stadium. I don't know what their options were. So I can't remember who
Jesse Crane.
What's
that? There? Jesse Crane, I believe, was there. He was just he was young, so Gardner didn't like him.
Jesse Crane would have. Yeah, I guess. Jeff. I mean, we called him the Crane wreck sometimes, so I don't know if that.
Oh yeah, he had his moments.
I don't know if that would have been there. But and then in Game 4 they had a chance to win that year too. Ruben Sierra hits the long home run off of Juan Rincon, inspiring the greatest quote of all time. Nobody wants to be in my pants right now, from Juan Rincon. I think he meant nobody wants to be in my shoes, but that's a story for another time. And that was
reminiscing on all these failures. It's getting me hyped up for Vikings season, man. We're almost there.
Right? It's just around the corner. Hey, at least the Vikings have won a playoff game fairly recently. That's like true. 2019, they won a playoff game. Like, the Wolves, the Wild, they've all at least won playoff games amidst all this failure. The Twins have not won a playoff game since 2004, and maybe that comes to an end this season. Certainly a winnable division. Final thing for you, Nick. We get kind of really micro on this year, I think baseball is a hard game to grind. Like, as you know, as a fan, as an observer, I think it's hard to kind of watch it one at a time because there's 162 of them. You can get kind of too locked in on the most recent result. Let's take a step back and think kind of about the 2, 3, 4 year plan. Like, organizationally, how do you feel like they're set up for 2024, 2025 and beyond, even if they don't achieve all of their wildest hopes and dreams in 2023?
I think they're set up pretty well. And I guess, now that you put that out there, it's kind of something that contributes to me saying, like, I don't know if I'm like trying to wipe out the entire front office. Like, they built a good infrastructure. They've got Pablo in place, locked down. I think that was a great move. Chris Paddock, locking him down that gives you another option for next year. They've got Joe Ryan, obviously. They've got some continuity finally in the rotation that you can feel good about. They haven't had that since Johan left, I don't think. They've shown some ability to develop relievers. Obviously got to get better there. But Duran and Jax are big success stories, and they've got some other arms coming up. And then you've got, another core already coming in to sort of contend with the current one when you've got Brooks Lee in AAA, you've got Royce Lewis on his way back, you've got Walker Jenkins and Emmanuel Rodriguez, some really good outfielders down in the minors. So I feel pretty good and optimistic. I think, obviously they're going to be building around the contracts of Correa and Buxton now as sort of these that is there. They have to build around that, and payroll's not going to be infinite. So a lot of it will hinge on if they're able to at least be somewhat valuable. They got to bounce back from this year, but they're still pretty young, and I still trust their track records, and they're good, talented players. So I feel good. I think Twins fans should feel pretty good about the outlook and the winning window, especially because who else in the AL Central is going to challenge them here in the next few years?
Well, yeah, that's the thing. And would you say getting Royce Lewis back is just as good as it's almost like trading for a player? They would say
almost like a trade. Yeah. When you put it that way, you know what? I love the trade deadline.
You could also acquire someone else and get Royce Lewis back. Let's just just throwing that out there. Anyway,
that's an option.
Nick Nelson, really appreciate your time and your perspectives. You guys do a great job at Twins Daily, including the wonderful satire of my good friend Randball Stew.
Yes.
Nick, appreciate the time as always, and we'll talk to you again soon, okay?
Yeah, sounds great. Thanks a lot, Mike.
Good stuff from Nick Nelson. Appreciated having him on the show for the first time. I think he made a good point about kind of the pitching depth going forward. I was a little bit wondering about that, earlier in the in spring training, even before they made whenever they made the Pablo Lopez, Luis Arias trade. Before that, you were kind of looking at this and saying, well, Joe Ryan is really the only guy who pitched last year that you would say is really firmly in the mix for 2024. Now Bailey Ober has emerged. Then they made the trade for Pablo Lopez, and he's signed to a long-term deal. And we can't forget about Chris Paddock, who they acquired in the Taylor Rogers trade. Also got Emilio Pagan in that deal. They'd signed him to a 3-year deal, a 3-year, $12 million deal. He's still coming back this year. Might still pitch at the end of this year, but he signed for 2 more seasons. Has been an effective starter when he's been healthy, trying to come back from that Tommy John surgery. So thinking about him, a guy with a career ERA of 4.2, 21 wins, 21 losses in a bunch of career starts, 65 career starts. He's been a pretty effective pitcher when healthy, a guy that can kind of lock down at least the bottom part of a rotation. So think about that. You got Lopez, Ryan, Ober, and Paddock at least kind of penciled in going into 2024. You can kind of build around that. If you don't have Sonny Gray again, if you don't have Tyler Mahle, certainly a free agent, Kenta Maeda, free agent. If that changes, if those guys aren't back, you've at least got some depth going into 2024 and really 2025 with all 4 of those guys as well. Let us finish quickly with the Cooler. Lynx lose to the last place team in the WNBA, the Indiana Fever. Hurts for playoff, hurts for pride. It was kind of a lopsided loss too, and Nafisa Collier in a lot of foul trouble in this game, and that's never a good sign for the Lynx. Probably just a one-off game. You're going to lose to the bad team sometimes. Hey, just look at the Twins. They just lost to the Tigers. Before that, a week or two ago, they got swept by the Royals. Sometimes this happens. Doesn't mean the sky is falling, but a disappointing loss for the Lynx. They'll be looking to get back on track and wipe the taste of that one away, because that is not how you want to be going right now. That'll do it for me today. Hope you enjoyed this show and all of the week's shows. Back at it again on Monday with Royce.